Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections at this time.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Communication from the governor concerning an appointment to the Nebraska Public Employee Retirement Systems. Additionally, new A bill, LB 272A from Senator Linehan. This bill for an act relating to appropriations appropriates funds aiding and carrying out the provisions of legislative bill 727 and declares an emergency. New LR 164 from Senator Dorn. That'll be referred to the executive board. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign Legislative Resolution 131. Senator Breezy, you're recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Just a reminder that the deadline for introducing interim study resolutions is the 80th legislative day, which is Thursday, May 18th, no later than noon on that day. Standing committees may also introduce one additional interim study resolution prior to adjournment sine die. Interim study requests submitted to the bill drafting staff by noon today will be guaranteed to be ready for introduction on the 80th day. Requests received after that time will be drafted if time permits. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact my office. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Mr. Clerk, we'll now proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, legislative bill 727. First of all, Mr. President, Senator Conrad would move to indefinitely postpone the bill pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F.
Senator Linehan, you're recognized to open.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. LB 727 is an important bill. There's several things in it that are fix it. I can think Senator Clemens has one on inheritance tax. Senator Hansen has a bill that fixes dates on the postcard. I'm just going to go through it, and then when I'm done, I'm hopeful everybody that's got a bill amended into this will speak on their parts of the bill. So the first, LB 727 includes AM 867. Can't read this morning. 867 is if an organization is going to build something for a city or a county and then give it to them, this will allow that organization to have the supplies to build whatever they're building. I'll give you an example. This specifically works for Heritage in Omaha is building a brand new public library for the city of Omaha. If City of Omaha was building that library, they wouldn't have to pay sales tax on any of the inputs to the library. But since Heritage is building it and then giving it to the city, Heritage would be paying those sales taxes. So this amendment helps Heritage get the same tax avoidance as they would if the city was building it. So I'd appreciate your support of that. LB 74 is also included. This was a bill that got to final last year. I think it was on final reading. And Chairman Stinner and I made an agreement that we had to both find $10 million. So this bill, even though it passed three times, or twice, I should say, and was on final, we pulled it out. It is to allow the same sales and use tax exemption of purchases if the end user, so if you have a manufacturing company and you yourself fix equipment or add equipment, you don't pay sales tax on it. But if you hire somebody to come in and do that, you have to pay sales tax. So it's just trying to make it even. It actually helps the smaller firms that don't have in-house help. Senator Salama is LB 96. Would you like to explain? Senator Salama, would you yield to our question?
Senator Slama, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Salama, would you like to explain what LB 96 does?
Oh, it would absolutely make my day to go through LB 96, which you so graciously included in AM 1152. What LB 96 does is it's a cleanup bill building off of a groundbreaking bill that we introduced last year to ensure that we are excluding twine and net wrap, those things that you use to make bales of hay, from our tax rolls. We were running into farmers that had the problem that as an ag input, twine and net wrap would either be taxed or not. They weren't given any warning from those vendors, and we're just further clarifying that as an ag input, twine and net wrap are exempt from sales tax in the state of Nebraska.
The next addition is LB 100, which is Senator Erdman's bill. Would Senator Erdman yield for a question?
Senator Erdman, would you yield to a question?
Most certainly I would.
Senator Erdman, would you please explain what LB 100 that's now included in this bill does?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Land. First of all, let me thank you and the committee for including this amendment, this bill as an amendment. This deals with the waste disposal treatment plant in Kimball, Nebraska. And what currently has happened, they're not eligible for the Imagine Act. And so what this would do, it just changes that the qualifications and the location of a North American industry classification system under the Nebraska revised statute, that this addition would allow the waste treatment and disposal facility there in Kimball to benefit from the Imagine Act. That's all it does, is make them eligible for the Imagine Act.
Thank you, Senator Erdman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was going to go to Senator Brandt, but we can't find him. So would Senator Von Gilleren yield to a question?
Senator Von Gilleren, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Senator Van Gilleren, would you please explain what LB 165 that's now included in this bill does? And I think it is a Senator Bosselman priority bill.
Yeah, LB 165 was originally brought to the floor, or brought to hearing, by Senator Geist, and is reference to 529 nest accounts. And it allows for aligning those accounts with some federal regulation, and allows the funds, I'm looking at the notes right now. The federal changes allow for contributions to a plan to be used to pay tuition at an elementary or secondary school of choice. 529 accounts can be used to help pay off student loans, but they cannot be used to pay for K through 12 tuition. Currently, Nebraska is only one of 11 states that does not allow 529 accounts to be used for K-12 funding.
Thank you, Senator Van Gilleren. So this is different than the 529 that was in the income tax bill. We did away with that last week. This is for accounts that are already existing. So the next bill is, we'll go to 300. This is for Community Alliance. It's a mental health center in Omaha. They do both outpatient and inpatient care. And right now, they have to keep track of whose medicines are inpatient and whose are outpatient, because they have to pay sales tax on the outpatient, but not, or collect sales tax on the outpatient, but not on the inpatient, which makes their bookkeeping a nightmare. So this would allow them not to collect sales tax, whether they were inpatient or outpatient. Next, I would go to LB 344. Senator Armendariz would yield to a question.
Senator Armendariz, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Armendariz, can you explain what your bill LB 344 did?
Yes, so 3 sessions ago, we passed the Nebraska Income Tax, Property Tax
1107.
Tax Credit Act. And unfortunately, it didn't have a look back date applied to it. So we're going to put a 5-year look back on that income tax credit. Unfortunately, one of the counties had to look back to 1998, which required a lot of money on their part, which is paid for by property taxes. So we want to limit and make some efficiencies in that process. It's a cleanup bill just to apply a 5-year look back on those.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. When Senator Armendariz brought this to me, I was confused. I'm like, they can't possibly do that. But somebody did try. So we just limit it. It's the income tax, property tax credit bill that was in 1107, and this just means it can't go back more than 5 years, which was never our intention. Senator Bostar, could you yield for a question, please?
Senator Bostar, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Bostar, you had LB 384, which is now part of this bill. Can you explain what LB 384 does?
Yeah, absolutely. LB 384 is a simple bill that takes the sales taxes from the sale or lease of aircraft and diverts that to a fund for the purpose of maintenance and repair of our state's airports.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. I appreciate that. The next bill we'll go to was my 407. It is the Nebraska Transformational Projects Act. I'm very excited about this.
1 minute.
It's called the Good Life Transformational Act. It's to promote and develop general and economic welfare for the state. It would include, and I'll wrap up on this when I get up next time. One thing I want to mention, if you're looking at the language, the date on page 4, section 12 will be extended. We're going to have some fix-it amendments, probably won't get till select, but that date will no longer be 2024. To qualify for this, they have to invest if you're in a county of over 100,000, which is Douglas, Sarpy, and Lancaster, you have to invest $1 billion. 1 billion with a B. You have to prove that 20% of your sales are from outside of the state. 20%.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Hughes would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Pat Hotovy of York. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I know that Senator Linehan was working through all of our colleagues that have different measures that have become a part of or are proposed to become a part of LB 727. So I know working through so many different proposals and different senators, it's hard to cover that in the limited time for our opening. So I would just want to really focus the body's attention on two primary matters this morning. So the first being that you may remember in the wake of the rules change that was adopted in contravention of our policies and practices without a public hearing, limiting the amount of motions that could be brought forward, I, Senator Hunt, and Senator Kavanaugh worked together to file a host of motions to structure debate for the remainder of the session. So that is why the motion to indefinitely postpone is on the board this morning. It is not to signal nor indicate that my intention is to indefinitely postpone the measure. Rather, I appreciate and am grateful for Senator Linehan and the Revenue Committee's work to put together a thoughtful package of proposals to address important revenue issues in each of our districts and all across the state. And by looking at the queue this morning, I think that we'll have a lot of opportunities to hear some more about the details of those proposals, as it seems quite full and quite robust. I also thought, considering how deep the queue was this morning, that it would be good to leave my motion on the board at least temporarily so that I have an opportunity to, again, thank Senator Linehan and the Revenue Committee for including a component of one of my bills in this package, LB 697, which relates to the Nebraska Job Creation and Main Street Revitalization Act, otherwise known as our historic tax credit. I also want to acknowledge the appreciation I have for Senator Slama and Senator Vargas, who have also brought forward similar measures in regards to this very important program. You may remember that this well-established, wildly successful program across a host of different metrics was set to expire at the end of 2022. So what my measure did, and like I mentioned, Senator Slama and Senator Vargas had similar but somewhat distinct measures before the Revenue Committee, all related to the continuation of this important program. And I think really reflecting and highlighting the importance of this program for communities great and small in rural Nebraska, in metro Nebraska. And when you look at the metrics, you can see that there have literally been hundreds of businesses benefited by this program. There have literally been thousands of jobs created and supported by this program. This program has helped to leverage millions of dollars in private investment into keeping our communities vibrant and beautiful and thriving. It has also leveraged considerable amount of volunteers, a significant amount of construction and rehabilitation. And I know from my past service in the legislature that this was really a program that enjoyed just incredibly vibrant support. And it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to bring forward this measure. So in addition to pushing the sunset date for the program out a bit further, my original underlying measure, LB 697, also addressed concerns that the Revenue Committee and other stakeholders had expressed in the past, including adjustments to the cap for the program itself, ensuring that there is a targeting mechanism to ensure an allocation for smaller requests and smaller projects to be available. It also reiterates that this measure does not include language regarding single-family homes, and it adds reporting requirements which are critical to ensuring transparency for all stakeholders, including the taxpayers, and performance metrics that we can use to evaluate the program as it continues forward. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions in regards to my component of the measure, but I will leave you with one final statistical point. I know that in Lincoln alone, there have been over 5 projects that have totaled over $1 million in tax credits requested under this program. And throughout the state, there has been over 27 million in terms of projects that have been requested in tax credits, with an average credit just being about $370,000. So that really goes to show you what a good value this program is, the widespread support for this program, and how important it is to continue and carry it forward. And I really appreciate Senator Linehan and the Revenue Committee for its inclusion in the committee amendment to LB 727. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Holcroft, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee for including my bill in this in 727. And I thank you for the opportunity to present my section of AM 1152 to LB 727. This was originally known as LB 580 with Amendment 634. This bill would amend Section 77-1344 and 77-1347 of the state statute. It would help to protect the incomes of farmers and ranchers across the state, and may well be the deciding factor as to whether some landowners are able to keep their properties. LB 580 was unanimously voted out of the Revenue Committee 8-0 on March 15th. It is a Speaker priority bill. It is also the most important bill in the package. It will allow land that is currently involved in production agriculture to retain its special tax valuation as agricultural land. The specific intent of the bill is to address land that is part of an annexed area, but is currently being farmed. The impetus of this bill happened in 2017. At that time, the city of Gretna annexed nearly 3,000 acres Of this, 21 parcels comprising 888 acres were agricultural land. Under current state statute, this annexed land automatically became subject to commercial property taxes. Coupled with inflation and market factors, this will result in a total land valuation increase from just over $5 million in 2022 to almost $18 million in 2023. One of the affected properties is the home of Vala's Pumpkin Patch. The owner, Tim Vala, testified at the Revenue Committee hearing for LB 580. In addition to the commercial property where their retailer operation is located, they have 300 acres of land where they grow their produce. Mr. Vala said that this land may well have to be sold and their pumpkins and apples purchased from outside vendors. He said this would diminish the experience of families being able to pick their own produce. Valas may also be forced to raise their admission prices to help offset the large tax burden. Other comments that were heard by testifiers in the hearing included that their farm was almost like part of the family, that this would be an unbearable tax burden, and that property owners should not be forced to sell because of a tax liability. The bill was amended by the Revenue Committee to exclude tracts of land that are 5 acres or less from receiving the special tax valuation. Once again, the purpose of LB 580 is to allow land that is currently involved in production agriculture to retain its special tax valuation as an agricultural land until such time as commercial improvement begins on the land. AM 634 assures that LB 580 applies to the 2023 tax year. It is retroactive to January 1st, 2023, and there is also an emergency clause in the amendment as well. I believe this is a problem that needs a common sense solution, and I believe LB 580 is just that. This is a simple, practical bill that will be beneficial statewide. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the remainder of my time to Senator Linehan.
Thanks, Senator Holcroft. Senator Linehan, that's a minute, 10 seconds.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Senator Brandt if he will yield to a question.
Senator Brandt, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I would.
Senator Brandt, you have 2 of your bills in this. Would you, either one, pick one, you would like to describe?
Well, with 1 minute, let's go with LB 118. And that makes 2 straightforward changes to the livestock modernization provisions in the Nebraska Advantage Rural Development Act. The program incentivizes investment in livestock production with refundable tax credits to livestock producers equal to 10% of new investment in a qualifying project. First, it lowers the minimum investment required for a project under this program from $50,000 to $10,000. And second, it creates a tiered application fee where larger projects pay the current $500 fee, and then $250 for a project between $25,000 and $50,000, and $100 for projects under $25,000. And the reason we did this is so that livestock producers in the state can buy a feed wagon or repair curtains on a barn, and if they didn't meet the $50,000 minimum, they didn't qualify for the program. $10,000 brings a lot more of these repairs and smaller producers into the equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt and Senator Linehan. Senator Lippincott, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, sir. And I was wondering if I can ask questions to Senator Elliott Boatsar. And it's regarding LB 384, and this is regarding funding and regulations as to the spending in the Department of Transportation Aeronautics Capital Improvement Fund. And Senator Boatsar, from what I understand right now, sales tax revenue.
Senator Boatsar, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I would.
Senator, from what I understand right now, sales tax revenue on aircraft at various local airports goes into a general fund. Is that correct?
Yes, currently that sales tax is collected like all general sales taxes for the state, and it goes to our general fund.
And Nebraska, unlike most other states, what they do is they use the sales tax, for instance, that airplanes, in purchasing airplanes, that sales tax then is used at the local airports in order to make the airports better, to keep the maintenance, these kinds of upkeep items with the airport, to keep them in good working order. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's certainly a common method for maintaining airport infrastructure among states. And it's also a common method that we use here in Nebraska for other infrastructure. So taxes and fees paid by vehicle drivers go to fund our roads. Taxes paid on, for example, ATV sales get diverted to game and parks for the maintenance of our trails and game and parks infrastructure. So this is really implementing something that is a common practice where the taxes paid by the users of a system goes to fund the maintenance and ongoing effort to preserve that very system that they are utilizing.
That makes sense. The taxes and revenue that's brought in from automobiles, gasoline, it's used to keep the upkeep of roads. And if we use the same methodology, then airplanes and the taxes that are brought in with the aircraft can be used to keep the airports in good working order. Right now here in Nebraska, we do have a great number of small airports that are dwindling, that just due to a lack of maintenance at the airports, some of them are closing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We are, honestly, we're losing our airports at a fairly alarming rate. And that's mostly due to the fact that we don't have the funding available, specific funding targeted toward the maintenance of our airports. And you know, I'll go and I'll get the exact figures of, you know, even what the last 10 years look like. But if I recall correctly, and I will double check this, I think we lose about an airport every year in the state of Nebraska.
That's unfortunate. Also, in addition to our state revenue, does the federal government, do they also match this?
Yeah, so all of this funding can be leveraged effectively at a 9-to-1 ratio. So, for example, $1 million put into this fund for the preservation and maintenance of our airports basically becomes $10 million in usable funding for our infrastructure. And so it's a generous program that the federal government provides, partially because this kind of infrastructure development is expensive, and second to that, it's that there is an understanding that airport infrastructure is critical for the growth and development of not just Nebraska, but all of the states in our union, and that's why that this revenue is set aside at the federal level.
An airplane sold at Grand Island, for instance, has you sell it for $100,000, 10% of that is tax. Then the federal government is going to take that times 9. Is that correct?
Yeah, effectively. So that $10,000 then in that example of tax would become $100,000 in usable funds for the maintenance of our airfields.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I mentioned earlier, I am in support of LB 727. I do have a bill within it, LB 344, mentioned earlier. It is a cleanup bill for the Nebraska Property Tax Incentive Act that was passed a few years ago. We decided we needed to place a look-back limit on that. What it did was create an open-ended look-back, caused a lot of time that our counties would have to invest in doing the look back on those property taxes. As I campaigned, property taxes were the #1 issue when we were visiting constituents at the door, and I want to address that in every way we can. Now, this is a little way to do that. Last week, we passed some bills that addressed it even broader and deeper, so I supported that as well. This bill, LB 727, not only addresses property taxes in this way, but also new incentives that some developers can take with And they have to make large investments to get those incentives as well. We also have a bill by Senator Hughes that will talk that creates new revenues as well. So just to mention again, I am in full support of LB 727, and I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan if she'd like it.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Linehan, that's 3 minutes, 20 seconds.
Is Senator Bostar, would Senator Bostar yield for a question?
Senator Bostar, will you yield to some questions?
Yes, I would.
Senator Bostar, you have LB 447 that's part of this bill, and I think it was prioritized by Senator Geist before she left. Could you please explain what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and correct, this was Senator Geist's personal priority bill. LB 447 expands upon work that we did last year, last session. And so I'll start there. So last session, we created a tax deduction for retired professional law enforcement individuals on their health insurance premiums. As well, we expanded the tuition waiver for law enforcement. So this year, that's being expanded to take a broader look at really first responders. So professional firefighters will receive the same tax deduction once retired on their health insurance premiums, as well as the tuition waiver to match what law enforcement officers received last year. And on top of that, dependents of these two groups would be eligible for tuition waivers as well.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. So how much time do you have left, sir?
1 minute, 35 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the big picture instead of calling on another senator to explain the part. All of these pieces either fix something that we need to fix that have generally been on consent and would have whipped through here with very little discussion. That would be the fixes on Senator Clemens' inheritance tax, the fixes on Senator Hansen's postcard, the fix Senator Armendariz is bringing forth, because it was never our intention. Actually, I remember when we passed 1107, there was a discussion whether they could deduct last year's too, because some people actually pay their taxes in the year they're due versus what I do is I pay them when they're about to go delinquent. So there was a discussion and he said, no, you can just do them. You can just take 1 year off. So the whole coming back for 5 years, that was never intended. So that is in here. I'm sure there's other things that the sales tax on, I think we'd all agree that if somebody is in counseling and they need, whether they're inpatient or outpatient, we need to do all we can for them, and we shouldn't be charging sales taxes at a mental health center for medicines. The other parts of the bill, and I'll dive more into it and other people will speak to it, they're all about growing our state, either through Senator Conrad's historic tax credit.
That's your time. Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. This is a, what shall I say, a huge bill to try to understand all of the amendments, the bills that have been amended in. But I was wondering if Senator Moser would yield to a question.
Senator Moser, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Moser, you and I had a conversation off of the mic about how you get around the indebtedness to the state with bonding. I had a conversation with somebody off of the floor while you were maybe describing that constitutionality challenge and how you dealt with that. Could you give me a brief description of how you think you're going to circumvent that constitutional requirement?
Well, I don't know how brief it would be, but the Build Nebraska Act funds the Capital Improvement Fund with sales tax revenue, and the legislature can use that to build highways. But the Constitution limits the revenue that the state can pledge to highway bonds. Those bonds must be paid from a revenue that is derived from sources closely related to highways, such as motor vehicle taxes or motor vehicle license fees. There are no current sources of law that determine whether general sales tax revenue is closely related to the use of highways. So I have an amendment that we're going to bring. I don't know if we're going to get to it on general or select, that will avoid the constitutional question by exchanging the source of funding for the State Highway Capital Improvement Fund from sales tax to motor vehicle fuel taxes and other revenues that are closely related to highway use. And the sales tax currently funding the State Highway Capital Improvement Fund will then be credited to another NDOT account, which will be used to build highways, but not to pay bonds.
Okay, so the limit on this is 450 million, is that correct?
That is correct.
And then it said also something about a $30 million a year annual debt service. Was that part of it as well?
I believe it's 35 million.
35,
in one of the
okay.
amendments, yes.
Okay, I seen it said 30. I was maybe wrong on that. Okay, so in your opinion, where would this most be eligible to be used? Do you have an idea? Do you have a section of your road that you're trying to get finished?
Well, it's the whole bill extends the Build Nebraska Act, and it's done within the Build Nebraska Act, and that's specifically mentions the expressway system.
Okay.
There are some other things that they have spent that Build Nebraska tax on, but
All right.
primarily the expressway system.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you.
I was wondering if Senator Linehan would yield to a question as well.
Senator Linehan, would you yield to a question?
Certainly.
Senator Linehan, 692 is your bill, and I think you're calling it Adopt the Good Life Transformational Project.
Yes.
And that's where anyone who spends up to $1 billion in investment can get an opportunity to get 2.75 sales tax returned if 20% of the business is done from out-of-state individuals. Is that a fair synopsis of what that is?
Yes.
Okay, so why do we need to do this? Wouldn't it be proper that if it's economically feasible, somebody would do this without having to have a turnback tax?
Evidently not, because this has been done in other places. The one I'm most familiar with, though, I was going to go there this weekend and I didn't, is at the Legends in Kansas City. And it's more than just retail. We're also hoping for extension of our soccer fields. So and we've heard about this before because we addressed some of it last year, but we are like a soccer field desert in the Midwest. We have families going from Lincoln to Kansas City to watch their kids play soccer. We have them going from Omaha to Des Moines. I know a family who their kids have been playing soccer and league soccer since they were little, and they've been going out of state for weekends.
Can you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. The other issue then I have with that explanation is, so are you saying that these people will come here to shop because do they pay the full 5.5% or do they pay the 2.75?
They pay the full 5.5%.
So how does that draw people here to spend their money here rather than Kansas City if we're charging the full 5.5%?
That's your time, senators.
Thank you.
Thank you, senators. Senator Clemens has guests in the north balcony, students, teachers, and sponsors of fourth graders, Elmwood Murdoch Public Schools in Elmwood, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Slama, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning, colleagues. I wanted to take a little bit more time to talk about LB 96, which Senator Linehan has included in LB 727, and also note the good work that Senator Holdcroft is doing with LB 580. So this amendment that Senator Linehan is hoping to get read across at some point this morning, hopefully we'll get that done sooner rather than later, contains LB 96, which would provide a sales and use tax exemption for twine. This is a piece of legislation that is modeled after LB 941, which I introduced and got passed last year. LB 941 exempted net wrap purchased for use in commercial agriculture from sales and use taxes as outlined in Nebraska Revised Statutes 77-2704.36. LB 941 was amended into LB 984, which did pass unanimously. As currently written, the statute provides a sales and use tax exemption for agricultural machinery and equipment, such as net wrap, that is purchased, leased, or rented for use in commercial agriculture. Twine used in baling of livestock feed or bedding falls under the category of agricultural equipment that is purchased for commercial agricultural use. To be specific, twine is referred to as the strong string of two or more strands twisted together used in the baling of livestock feed or bedding. LB 96 would just make it abundantly clear in statute that twine used in the baling of livestock feed and bedding is in fact agricultural equipment that should be exempt from taxes, just like anything else. Additionally, AM 64 was also adopted to be amended into LB 96, which includes defining and providing sales and use tax exemption for baling wire. So a little bit more color and background on LB 96. At the start of 2022, my predecessor's predecessor, former Senator and former Lieutenant Governor Levon Heidemann, who's been an incredible mentor for me. He's been a wonderful representative of Southeast Nebraska, and I'm so grateful to be able to follow in his footsteps. But he gave me a call about an issue that farmers in Southeast Nebraska were running into, that they were being taxed on their net wrap purchases when they were buying their baling equipment for the season. So we introduced LB 941, which passed without any kind of controversy last year. And then at the beginning of this year, our attention was drawn to the fact that we had excluded two other methods for baling hay, twine, and baling wire for straw bales. So we included that language in LB 96 and also defined twine. I never thought that I would need to define twine during my time in the legislature, but here we are. LB 96 is a bill that is the definition of a consent calendar bill. So I'm very grateful to Senator Linehan for working with me and getting that included. LB 580, which is another bill in LB 727 eventually, is Senator Holdcroft's bill. And I'd like to take a moment to highlight the great work that Vallis Pumpkin Patch does in our state. When you talk about value-added agriculture, Vallis Pumpkin Patch is it. Thousands upon thousands of people come from across the state and a lot from out of state to visit the best pumpkin patch, in my opinion, in the Midwest. And Vallis has been under increasing pressure with urban sprawl to give up their land, give it up for development. And as we're developing the area of eastern Nebraska, we need to make sure that we're not cutting off our noses to spite our faces and not killing off one of the great economic drivers in the fall and south. Thank you, Mr. President. One of the great economic drivers in our state in the fall season, Vallis Pumpkin Patch, in order to have a new parking lot or a new interchange or anything like that. Because this pumpkin patch generates millions of dollars in revenue in our state, and the value of this pumpkin patch is so much greater than anything it could be developed or used for. So I would just really like to thank Senator Holdcroft for fighting the good fight on this and protecting one of our state's most well-known farmers. So that's all I have to say about LB 727 for now, and I'll be sure to get back in the queue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to speak this morning on a couple of bills. First, I'd like to speak specifically to LB 384, which was introduced by Senator Bostar, again dealing with sales tax on the sale of lease of aircraft. I want to explain a little bit more, having served on an airport authority in North Platte for many years, what really is going on here. When you look in rural Nebraska, the way we fund our airports is a lot of the improvement projects, also referred to as AIP projects, airport improvement projects, they're funded 90% by the federal government if it's an approved project. The problem is coming up with that 10%. Now, if you're in North Platte, we have some revenue because we have regularly scheduled flights that come into North Platte, as does Kearney and Scotts Bluff and a few others. But when you get into other areas of rural Nebraska, one in particular I think of is up in Thomas County. They were fortunate a few years ago to get significant federal funding, which was limited at the time, to improve their airport. But there are many airports, rural airports, that are used by private pilots doing aerial spraying, just amateur pilots, and for distressed aircraft that are flying across the state and need a place to land. These, just like roads, need improvement. The sun, the winters that we have here will damage these airports. They need to be maintained. And the only way to come up with that 10% right now is generally through property taxes. So many of the smaller airports in my district find that it's very difficult to be able to qualify for the federal AIP grants because they can't come up with the 10%. If we look at this particular bill and think about what's done in other industries, for example, boats and ATVs, the sales tax generated from boats and ATVs is turned over to the Game and Parks Commission. When you look at the sale of motor vehicles, the sales tax of motor vehicles goes to the Highway Trust Fund. So it would just make sense that the sales tax that's generated from the sales and lease of aircraft would go into this airport fund where it could be used to help fund that 10%, particularly for these smaller rural airports who can't come up with that 10%. It's a critical infrastructure need, particularly for rural Nebraska. I don't know how many times I've heard stories, particularly up in Thedford, where they've had distressed aircraft, where there was no place to land except for that airport. When the Halsey fire occurred, the Bow V fire last summer, that was really taken over by the feds, and they were able to come in there and bring in their helicopters and fixed wing aircraft and land it there at the Thedford airport to be able to fight that fire. These are critical infrastructure of rural Nebraska, and the only way we're going to be able to maintain these existing airports is to be able to have the funding necessary. There's no better deal that we're going to get than a 90-10. The federal government's going to come in and give us 90% of the funding. We still need to come up with that 10%. And the only way we can do it otherwise is through property taxes. So I hope this will remain in the bill, in the bigger package. I think this is an important piece of what we're doing. I also want to speak to Senator Holdcroft's bill, LB 580. Senator Holdcroft, I would agree with you. It's probably one of the more important pieces. I know Senator Hughes is going to disagree with me on that, but because she thinks her bill is more important. But this is a pretty important deal here, Senator Hughes. And I would tell you, just imagine that if you've got land that's been farmland, thank you, you've had farmland that surrounds a community and they annex it in, and then you end up having to pay higher property taxes to the point where your property taxes are greater than the rental income you could get from the farmland. It's just patently unfair. It needs to be fixed. This is a very, very important piece of just equity and being fair to our farmers that are seeing encroachment from larger cities in particular. So I would encourage you to support both this bill, particularly with these two components within it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 727. LB 727 contains my bill LB 584, which for the first time imposes an excise tax on vaping products here in Nebraska. The use of e-cigarettes or vaping has exploded among our teenagers and become a growing problem for children even younger here in Nebraska. Vaping has reversed the decades of gains that we've achieved in reducing the underage use of nicotine. Taxation of these projects is a step in the right direction of preventing more young people becoming addicted to nicotine. LB 584 puts the excise tax of 5 cents per milliliter on devices smaller than 3 milliliters, and there's a 10% tax on wholesale price for devices greater than 3 milliliters. The basis for this tiered system of taxation is due to the fact that there are two main types of vaping devices: The first type is smaller and disposable, and these are the ones taxed at the 5 cents per milliliter. The second most common type of device are refillable, and these are taxed as a percentage of the wholesale price on the liquid, in this case, a 10% wholesale. The pages have handed out information on these vaping taxes and what other states are currently doing. And just, we've kind of highlighted which ones we are actually at that bottom range of what we're asking for. I would like to thank the Revenue Committee and Chair Linehan for including my priority bill as part of this package, which I do think is one of the most important bills in this package, Senator Holcroft and Jacobson. And I'd like to note that in addition to being voted out by the Revenue Committee 8-0, LB 584 is the lone revenue generating bill in this total package. We amended LB 584 when it was reported out of the committee to include the two-tiered system of taxation. So the fiscal note currently sitting on LB 584 is a little low. Once we have a new note on LB 727, after we advance LB 727 to select, we will have a better sense of how much revenue it will generate. Based upon rough numbers with the two-tiered system, we conservatively estimate that it will raise around $10 million over the next 4 years. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to vote green on LB 727, and I yield the balance of my time to Senator Linehan. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Linehan, you have 2 minutes and 35 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm going to finish up where we ran out of time when I was talking, having a dialogue with Senator Erdman. One of the testifiers at the hearing on this was, Rob Heineman, who is a co-owner of Sporting KC. He's very involved in soccer. And one of the things that this project would change is we would have more soccer clubs having tournaments in Nebraska instead of families from Nebraska driving to Des Moines, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Denver. I know of one of all the state championships for soccer that are going on right now. We have Omaha South and Prep are playing tonight. I've been watching Prep because I have a family that I know that he's playing. Scott Norris played last night. I think Scott won because poor Norris player missed the field goal. We have Gretna and Southwest played. We have Lincoln Southeast. We have Lincoln Southwest, Columbus, Gretna, Papillion, La Vista. 32 high school teams played in a soccer tournament over the last few days, and I think it ends tonight. I don't know for certain, but I would guess that most of those kids playing those soccer teams have been playing since they were 8 or 9 years old.
1 minute.
And they've been playing club soccer. And their families have been getting in a car with their siblings and driving out of state to play soccer. It's a huge loss to our state. And we did improvements last year. We got soccer fields. There's some in La Vesta. There's some in Valley. But we still aren't big enough to have enough fields for these huge tournaments. So this would be, to Senator Erdman's question, why would they come here? That's one reason they would come here. They would come here because of the shopping that will bring, the retail, it only qualifies if it's new to the state. So it doesn't mean that somebody it has to be new to the state retailer. IKEA, everybody knows IKEA, I think. That would be one that they would try to get. Yes, I know young people love IKEA. So I really think it's
That's
hard.
your time, Senators.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hardin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of LB 727, not fond of the IPP, but I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Erdman if he would like to have the time.
Senator Erdman, that's 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Hardin. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. President. So in my conversation earlier with Senator Linehan and her explanation of 692, it is peculiar, I should say, in the least, that we are always looking at ways to eliminate things that we collect sales tax on. And when the voters of the state in 1966 voted no more property tax for the state, which was their only form of revenue, the next legislative session, the legislature implemented sales tax and income tax, which we had never had before. And at that time, almost everything we sold in the state, we collected sales tax on. Case in point, when I was running for the legislature back in 16, one of my opponents was a business person in Sydney, and he was in business in 67. And he said, when they originally put sales tax in place, everything sold in the city of Sydney, 96% had sales tax associated with that purchase. 96. And 7 years ago, that number was down to 46. 46%. We've exempt 50% of everything you used to sell in Sydney and collect sales tax has now been exempt. So how you make tax fair, you broaden the base and lower the rate. So if we want to make a difference in the state and we want to make a difference in the economy, we have to take our foot off of the throat from the economic driver, and that is income and property tax. And so exempting another entity from sales tax, decreasing the base, what would be there, doesn't make sense. And so those other people in that same area where they're going to build these facilities, they don't get to take any advantage to this 275 sales tax kickback. It's another example of the state picking winners and losers. We have the Imagine Act, which does the same thing. We have TIF, which does similar. So we have all of these things that we do in the state of Nebraska because for 55 or 6 years, we've understood that our taxes are too high, and we keep putting a Band-Aid on an amputation. And then we restrict things that could have sales tax collected on if you have $1 billion. So anybody who has $1 billion in those communities or those counties that have 100,000, play at a different level than the rest of you who are in business. You tell me if that's not picking winners and losers. But we got to remember, we have to do this because Missouri does it. We have to do this because other states do this, and we have to be competitive. How about this? How about we fix our broken tax system in its entirety, and then we wouldn't have to continue to do all of these things that we do every year, trying to figure out how to entice someone to come here, build something, or start a business. But we're not interested in fixing the system. We're interested in continuing to do what we've always done and expect different results. If you think this is the last one of these opportunities you're going to hear in this body, you're wrong. They will continue, and they will continue until we actually fix the broken system. But we're not willing to do that, and so we'll keep doing what we've been doing for years and years and expect different results. You figure out what that definition is. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator DeKay, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. This morning I rise to support LB 727. I do oppose the IPP. We have already talked a lot about LB 384, LB 580, LB 96, and LB 584. Those were four of the bills that were of high interest to me. So with that, if she would like it, I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Linehan, that's 4 minutes and 25 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator DeKay. So I'm going to go back to other things, other bills that are included in 727. Is Senator Breezy, would he yield to a question, please?
Senator Breezy, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
This is very timely, Senator Breezy, because I'm getting texts asking me what this bill does. So could you explain what this bill does?
Sure. My provision in here was originally LB 495, and LB 495 deals with the Nebraska Nest 29 program, and it really makes it more attractive by allowing penalty-free rollovers of unused 529 plans to Roth individual retirement accounts starting in 2024, which is in line with the federal changes. And this change really is designed to relieve account holders' concerns about overfunding their Nest 29 account plans. But again, this has to be in line with federal rules to that effect. And I think it can't be a rollover of contributions made to that account within the most recent 5 years. There's an annual limit on that. There's an overall limit on it. And there are several guidelines really outline, or again, it's tied to the federal guidelines in that respect. That in a nutshell is what it does.
Okay, that helps because I think I understand why the confusion was. There was another bill, it was in the income tax bill that dealt with 529s where we would allow them for K through 12. That went away with an amendment. Wasn't that right, Senator Breezy?
Yes, that is true. This is something completely same program, but a completely different issue.
So this would be if I could be so lucky, too much money in a grandchild's 529 college plan, then when the child gets all scholarships, let's say, and they don't have to pay for college, maybe we could get that lucky, then they could use that money to put into their IRA, or is it to the donor's IRA?
Into the beneficiary's IRA. Good point.
So it would set them up good for retirement if they were lucky enough to get through college without spending it all.
Yes, very true.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. I appreciate that. Next, Senator Hughes has already talked about her bill. Senator Conrad, is Senator Conrad available?
Senator Conrad, would you yield to some questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up, but I know you're very well prepared because you already talked about your part of the bill. Your part of the bill was originally 697, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And can you, I know some people, I think there's more people on now than when you first talked about it. Would you kind of explain what your original intent and what's in the 727 does?
Yes, thank you so much, Senator Linehan. And just wanted to reiterate that my original bill, LB 697, also had similarities with LB 213 introduced by Senator Slama and LB 756 introduced by Senator Vargas. Each of our measures touched upon the Nebraska Main Street Revitalization Act and made, thank you, Mr. President, made a variety of adjustments. The primary components being extending the sunset date, addressing functionality in terms of the match, and ensuring things like reporting, while also having tighter caps overall and exclusions for single-family homes, et cetera.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. I will yield the rest of the time back to the chair.
Thank you, senators. Senator Sanders, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I would like to thank Senator Linehan and the Revenue Committee for their work. One of the bills, AM 1396, is my bill, LB4. This bill would make a small adjustment and clean up language relating to the homestead exemption application process. This concept was introduced as LB 1080 during last year's session. While it passed the Revenue Committee on 8-0 vote, the legislature ran out of time to discuss it. LB4 changes the homestead exemption application for permanently and totally disabled veterans so that they can apply every 5 years instead of every year. This makes the application process more veteran-friendly to account for those who are permanently disabled, and makes it difficult to refile for exemption every year. LB4 has also other technical provisions, including fraud deterrence and where fees and penalty funds will go. To be clear, this bill does not expand the eligibility for homestead exemptions. This merely adjusts the application process. This bill was introduced to the Revenue Committee on January 26, and it passed on an 8-0 vote. AM 1396 includes the provisions for a compromise with the Nebraska Association of County Officials to ensure that applicants who apply in this manner do so at the same 5-year intervals as all other applicants. This simplifies bookkeeping for the counties, and there is no fiscal note. Again, I thank Senator Lanahan and the Revenue Committee, and I urge your support on AM 1396 and LB 727. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Brandt has guests in the north balcony. 54 fourth graders from Wilbur Claytonia School in Wilbur. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 727 and opposed to the IPP. The Revenue Committee heard many bills that did not make the cut for this package. Every one of these bills that are in 727 came out of committee 8-0, with work and modifications being done in committee. These bills make good government changes to improve our state. And I'd like to reiterate on a couple of them. LB 692, the Good Life Districts. As the parent of kids who played baseball, I can attest to the fact that we do not have in this state the type of facilities that will attract teams from out of state. We would travel virtually every weekend during baseball season, sometimes Council Bluffs, but other times Des Moines, Colorado, Kansas City, Minnesota, always leaving the state, always spending quite a bit of money because we had to get hotels, we had to go out for lunch, we had other kids we were bringing along with. There's a lot of money being spent. And if we can do something to bring some of those here to this state, I think we would be very, very well served. LB 447 adds professional firefighters to a health insurance tax credit and tuition waiver, and adds law enforcement and firefighters' dependents to tuition waivers. That's really critical right now. Across the country, we are seeing declines in recruitment for both firefighters and the police forces. We need to make sure our law enforcement knows and understands that we support them and that we will recruit the best of the best. This is just one way to do that. Our university did a really good job of working with Senator Bosar to make sure that this worked out well. LB 505 takes a look at the tax deed certificate system. Very early on in the session, I was contacted by a woman named Joy who had lost her home due to the tax deed certificate system. It was a really sad story. The Nebraska Examiner went on to write an article about her, and currently this issue is being taken up in the Supreme Court. This is something that we need to make sure that our law is going to be reflective of what the Supreme Court is going to decide. Senator Bosar worked very, very hard to make sure that this bill will still support the businesses who do this as a business, but not rob people of the entirety of their equity that they've built into their home. And then the last one that made a huge impact, when they came and testified, the city of Kimball brought, I think, every single person from the city talking about LB 100, which basically just changes the provisions of the Imagine Nebraska Act to include waste treatment and disposal. That was one of the industries that was not included, and it will give them significant benefits. And they have a very large facility out in Kimball, and they are growing very, very quickly. I think it's important that we make sure we look at industries across the state and support them as they grow. And I yield my time to Senator Linehan if she would like it.
Thank you, Senator Kauth. Senator Linehan, that's a minute, 55 seconds.
Okay. Senator Merman, are you available?
Senator Merman, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you're short time here, but maybe we'll come back to it. Could you explain what LB 704 that's currently now in 727 does?
Yes, LB 704 has to do with enable accounts, and these accounts are used for disability-related expenses without impacting resource-based benefits such as supplemental security income or Medicaid. And an enable owner, when they pass on, this would allow them to
give $5,000 or less that's in an enable account to another beneficiary, so it would not, the account would not have to go through probate. It would
1 minute.
save a lot of expense that way, and it's limited to $5,000 or less.
Thank you, Senator Merman. So since we only have a minute, repeat, I think I understand. So you have these accounts to help pay for expenses for a disabled child. That doesn't affect other benefits they get by law. And if there is money left, $5,000 or less left in the account upon their death, that money could be dispersed to their family without going through probate in court.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Merman, you're next in the queue and recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another bill that I have in the package is LB 809, which increases tax credits available under the Nebraska Advantage Rural Development Act to $10 million annually. This amount is currently $1 million, and it's distributed quickly on a first-come, first-served basis. I've heard that Milk Specialties, a dairy processor in Norfolk, could be a beneficiary of this project. They have a expansion going on there. And there are other dairy processors that, or at least one that has a high likelihood of being located in our state. And with both this expansion at Dairy Specialties and the possible other dairy processor located in the state, there'll be a lot more demand for milk production in the state of Nebraska. We would rather have that milk produced, especially in Norfolk, in Nebraska, and reduce the amount that's imported from South Dakota or Iowa. It would be much more beneficial to the state to have that milk produced in Nebraska. And then if the other plant is located also in Nebraska, a big plant, it will have a demand for, I believe, almost doubling the amount of milk production in the state. And to ramp up that much production quickly, this bill would incentivize dairy farmers to increase the size of their herds, or also farms to come into Nebraska, possibly from California. There's dairy farms being forced out of California because of the population there and the environmental regulations and so forth. So we have opportunity to locate those in Nebraska, some of those in Nebraska. Also in Colorado, if they run out of water or have a limited amount of water available there, it would be a possibility that some of that production could be moved into Nebraska also. This funding, the qualifications for it are being reduced so that counties of less than 15,000 population or less than 25,000 populations have lower qualifications for livestock producers or dairy producers to qualify to obtain these tax credits. There's also a agricultural processor that will possibly locate in District 38, and we're in competition with Kansas and South Dakota for that processor. This one is not a dairy processor, but it's an agricultural processor. With this incentive, it would make it much more likely that that processor would locate in Nebraska rather than those other states. The Nebraska Advantage Act, with this rural advantage part of the Development Nebraska Advantage Act, makes this funding available for
1 minute.
Greater Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President, and the 3rd District. So this bill is very important for value-added agriculture, which is very beneficial for everyone in the state of Nebraska, both through taxes and just through further economic activity in our state. We have the crops available, the water available, livestock available. It works very well for expansion of value-added production in our state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to review some of the bills that are of importance to me. And if I'm repetitive, I apologize. I had a couple of schools from my district I've been speaking to and just came back in. Number one bill that I have in the package is LB 97. Last year, I had a bill that changed the rates on inheritance tax, and the reporting of it wasn't quite what we wanted. So this year, it's regarding inheritance tax. There's no change in the rate, but what the counties report to the state is important to us so that we can track better how that tax is performing. There are different tiers and categories of inheritance tax payers, and this will clarify what the amount of tax is coming to each county. And then next one, I noticed that LB 100 from Senator Erdman is in here to allow a company involved in disposal to qualify for incentives. And I was out in Kimball a year ago visiting a company that does that, and I believe they were going to expand by about $200 million, but they were not eligible, and I support their eligibility as they're bringing a lot of economic development and employees to that area. And I also support preserve the third, as we say. Then there'll be 384 regarding the airport sales tax, using sales tax on aircraft for airport construction. I looked at the fiscal note. That's going to reduce our general fund revenues by 1.3 million the first year, 1.5 million the second year, about 2.95, almost $3 million of lost revenue that'll reduce our bottom line in the state budget. But that will allow for about $30 million worth of airport construction with the 9-to-1 federal match. And every year we do have requests for general funds from the Department of Transportation and Aeronautics. And general funds are always precious as far as spending them. But when we get a multiple of that sort, I like to see that. So I'm supporting the LB 84 tax, airplane tax, to be used for airport construction. Number 505, the one that's labeled stopping home equity theft. I had, as a small town banker, I had recently an elderly farmer in his 80s who he and his wife having medical problems, and they were unable to pay the real estate tax. An investor bought the taxes for 3 years, and the couple, they were in the hospital or doctor visits and weren't not paying attention to their mail. And the 80 acres they owned for years and years was sold to the investor. Suddenly they didn't own their own house they lived in, and they ended up having to buy an acreage back from the investor, and the investor kept the farmland, and they just got an acreage and lost the value of 70 acres, $500,000 loss probably.
1 minute.
Thank you. So I do support that. The investors, we need to keep attracting investors, so the investor does get to keep the 14% interest and the cost of the sale, because we do need investors to buy those so the county taxes are collected. Finally, on the back, on the green sheet today, you'll see there's $891 million of excess funds, and I am glad to see a big number like that. This is going to use some of those, but I would really hope that we carry a couple, $200 or $300 million to the future biennium, not spend all the $891 million you'll see on the bottom of your sheet. But I do support most of the tax bills. I'm glad to hear that they're going to be adjusted to make sure that they're sustainable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. And Senator Clemens has some guests both in the north balcony and under the south balcony, fourth graders from Louisville Elementary in Louisville, Nebraska. You are welcomed by the Nebraska State Legislature. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to discuss a little bit about AM 1396. I do have a bill in there, LB 529, I'd like to talk a little bit about and explain a little bit more in detail. LB 529 is a bill to clean up the pink postcard bill. Some of you might remember that we passed a couple years ago and went into effect last year. In my opinion, and among the opinion of many others, it was very successful with thousands of people showing up to the hearings across the state, and many learned about the budgeting process. And we didn't want to bring too many changes until we were able to give this a few years to play out, get a better understanding of what worked, what didn't work, how we can improve upon it. However, this year we were hoping to make some of the following changes to help with the clarity and also to give more time for elected officials to change the proposed budget after the hearings, if necessary. So with that, in LB 529, some of the changes that we made, one of the bigger ones at the request of the schools was to clarify that a property tax request in this context would exclude bonds issued or authorized by the school district. Last year, this caused some confusion because some schools included a tax while others didn't. The programming for tax statements has school bonds listed as a separate authority. And this makes sense as not every bond will apply to every resident of a political subdivision. So I decided to keep things simple and exclude the bonds. Also, at least on the behest of many of the people who attended the hearings, they wanted at least one elected official present at the joint public hearing. Typically, when people discuss their budget, their revenue, their expenses, went through the process. Typically, they were like a superintendent, a city administrator, county administrator. And so I think a lot of people felt like they really wanted to have somebody that they elected up there in the front listening to them. And so that was one of the changes we made in this. A county also who has a population of more than 10,000 will need to post a hearing notice on their website, on the homepage of their website, and also their budget, from my understanding. No, just a notice of the website, on the website, excuse me. And also a big one that we heard from both political subdivisions and people was the timeline. So with that, this does update the timeline. September 4th would start the postcard process instead of September 10th. The hearings could be held September the 17th or the 29th last year. The budget is due September the 30th, so it made it difficult to change the budget if it was needed. This bill would require the hearings to be held from the 14th to the 24th, and this would allow 6 days to amend the budget if needed. On the fifth page, LB 529 gives some guidance for what information will be gathered at the hearings to help us know how effective truth in taxation legislation is. It requires the name of each political subdivision, the real growth value, the percentage, the amount they seek to increase their property tax request, and the number of individuals who signed in to attend the joint public hearing to be recorded. So you can see a lot of these changes aren't monumental, they're not huge. A lot of them are kind of mild to moderate in nature, but as a whole, they help improve the process of the pink postcards, make it more efficient and effective, get the information out there to the public that we can, and help keep them informed. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I spoke briefly with Senator Linehan about my provision in here, which was represented by LB 495. And again, LB 495 and is reflected in this bill would allow the penalty-free rollover of unused 529 plans to Roth individual retirement accounts. And why is that provision important? You know, for example, a beneficiary might decide not to attend college. They might receive a full ride or other significant scholarship and financial help, or they might attend a school or program that has lower than expected tuition. Previously, if you were saving for that beneficiary to attend college, but they ended up never enrolling, that would trigger a 10% penalty, and you would have to pay income tax if you wanted to withdraw from the account. But with the passage of this provision in these scenarios, the excess Nest 529 funds can be used to help the beneficiary with saving towards retirement. And really, this provision can make Nest 529 accounts a more powerful saving tool, especially for parents who are interested in helping their kids begin saving for retirement. It will help lift some of the burden from an account holder looking to support a beneficiary, both in their higher education goals and in retirement if necessary. And I also wanted to speak to a couple other provisions in this bill. In particular, the first one, Senator Holdcroft's LB 580, and that's an extremely important provision in here, because without this provision, without Senator Holdcroft's 580, to be valued as ag land, property had to be outside of city limits. So we heard from a fellow at the hearing on this provision with a 117-acre farm that was annexed into Gretna. So it was no longer valued as ag land. So now he's taxed at 3 times the amount of his rent. And I believe he indicated that his property tax on his farm was $528 per acre. And as you well know, that doesn't work for anybody. The status quo essentially is going to deprive him of his property. He'll be forced out of his property, it would seem to me, and this language is sorely needed by folks like him and many others in similar situations. And so I thank Senator Holdcroft for bringing this. It was a very important piece of legislation. Also want to thank Senator Slama for bringing her LB 96. You know, really the ideal sales tax is a one-time tax on a retail consumer transaction. We should always strive not to tax business inputs, business expenses. But unfortunately, I think it's roughly 40% or over 40% of our sales tax base really are business inputs and business expenses. And so anytime we can shift the sales tax base away from business expenses, business inputs, we should definitely consider it. And Senator Slama's bill is one small step we can take in that direction to make a better sales tax base. And with that, I would yield my time, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Boslin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the IPP motion and in favor of LB 727. And looking through the bill and also the handout that was provided to us this morning, it's clear that they worked hard on this package, and there are a lot of important features to this. Among them, I told Senator Linehan that my family played a lot of soccer growing up. We did travel out of state for those games all too often. For the record, it was not me participating in the sport. I was not good at soccer, but my family did have 2 soccer players. We went all over for tournaments for the very reasons that she's highlighted in this bill. So you go to Colorado, there's shopping there, there's things to do there, there's really nice facilities. Same with Kansas City, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, places like that. So the intention of this bill is certainly met with the language that she's crafted here. And so for those reasons, I would support that. Mr. President, I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Senator Boslin. Senator Linehan, that's 3 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Boslin. I can't speak to it better than Senator Boslin or Senator Kauth that actually lived these experiences, because I didn't have a soccer player. I don't think club soccer, maybe it was, and I just didn't have my children involved in it. But I know that it is certainly a huge deal now. And I also know I'm very lucky. I live not quite in Elkhorn, but outside the city limits of Elkhorn and Omaha. Actually, I'm in an SID, and it goes up pretty close to the river. So I drove, when I come to work, come to the Capitol, I go by Nebraska crossings. I go through, I'm south of Center, so I have watched, since I've lived there, and I haven't lived there even 10 years yet, I have watched on the mile and 3/4 to my house from 204th Street, there were 2 houses. There are now 5 subdivisions. And I think yesterday, Mother's Day, we went to Mahoney Park, and there are still 3 or 4 fields between Center Street and Gretna that aren't getting turned. They will have crops in them this year, but most of it is all cement and culverts going in and getting ready to build more subdivisions, and there's going to be some retail along that. I don't think we have any idea of how much potential there is to keep people in Nebraska playing soccer, bring people from outside of Nebraska to play soccer, and how much new-to-market retail would be involved. And in the long run, this is a huge win for Nebraska. We've always, since I've been here, we've talked about the 3 legs of the stool. We have property taxes are too high, income taxes are too high, sales tax not too high. It's about average for the country. I'm not saying that the rate should go up, but we're losing sales, huge amounts of sales, to retailers that aren't in Nebraska. So I'm here to answer any questions on that. I've got more information here if you want to talk off the mic to me. But with that, I yield the rest of my time to the chair. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about my part of this bill. I'm in support of LB 727. It has a number of bills included within it, and one of them is 706. And it's a bill that seeks to authorize the issuance of bonds not to exceed $450 million in principal and $35 million in annual debt service under the Nebraska Highway Bond Act. It's in section 39-2209. In order to accelerate completion of the highway construction projects identified by the Build Nebraska Act, which was LB 84, sponsored by Deb Fisher in 2011. Additionally, the bill seeks to extend the sunset date of the Build Nebraska Act from 2033 to 2044 so that the Department of Transportation can rely on the revenue stream to pay the debt service on the bonds. So it has a multiple clause effect on roads. First of all, it allows the Department of Transportation to bond to build roads in more efficient manner, larger sections over more time. If the Lincoln South Beltway was built the way that Highway 30 has been constructed from Schuyler to Fremont, you'd get about to 48th Street or so and you'd hit barricades. I drove on that Beltway Sunday and it is very nice. I am happy to see it done, but I think that bonds would help accelerate the Nebraska Expressway system. We started that in, I think, 84, 88. Anyway, and the deadline is supposed to expire in 2033, but 2033, in the way that the Department of Transportation works, is that deadline is screaming up upon us, and it doesn't make sense to have bonds of a length longer than your revenue stream would be able to pay back. So that's kind of the reason for the extension of the Build Nebraska Act. I'm really grateful to Senator Walz, who brought this bill and another bill, similar bills, in previous years. 542 was one of her bills that both Senator Flood and I signed on to. We weren't able to get that bill passed, but this is basically her bill with a few enhancements. And then there is one question that several have asked about the constitutionality of using sales tax to pay bonds back. And the amendment that we will offer on this will add some language that will clarify that the bonds are to be paid back
from the taxes that are closely associated with building roads. And then the sales tax will be funded to another Department of Transportation account to help back fund those. But that's a way of clarifying that those bonds are to be paid from fuel taxes, license fees, and other revenue sources closely related to highway use.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Bostoman has some guests under the south balcony, 7 members of the Parliament of the People of the Republic of Kenya who will serve on the Budget and Appropriations Committee there. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand opposed to the IPP motion and in favor of most of LB 727. And just for clarification, I have already discussed these issues with Senator Linehan, so this will not come to us as a surprise to her. And I also feel confident based on many of the things that need tweaking in the bill that we'll see changes between general file and select. And I'm hoping that what I talk about now will be one of those changes, or at least part of those changes. So I was really disappointed when Senator Sanders and Senator Holcroft stood up to talk about their bills, but didn't talk about the concerns that have been expressed to us from the Sarpy County leadership outside of Gretna. And their concern is about the LB. Can you please stop talking loudly? The LB 692 part of the bill, there are concerns from some of the leadership within Sarpy County, and I know you received a letter from the committee in reference to it as well. And here are some concerns that I think are negotiable. I don't feel confident that we'll get all of this, but I'm hoping that we will get some of this. And I know that the fiscal note will change things as well as to what we'll be able to do and not do. And so one of the things is that we're concerned about, there doesn't seem to be a really good performance indicator. I know there was a public hearing and that people came to speak on the bill itself. But once the bill is implemented, because we are doing a cash cow kind of thing again, which we've done so many times this year in reference to big business, I think it's really important that there is some kind of annual or biannual performance indicator. How can they let us know that this process is working and that it will serve Nebraskans well as to how we use the funds that they give us to take care of? And then we want to make sure that they match minimum wage across the state. We know there's a workforce shortage, and we know that what people are paid are part of that. Now, Senator Linehan said something really spot on to me when I was discussing this with her, which is that if you want to hire people, you pretty much have to be competitive with wages in Nebraska because there are so many job openings and so few people trying to work. But I don't see any problem with actually asking for that. Saying that is our expectations that if we help you be successful in Nebraska, you help our citizens also be successful, to make sure that they can pay their bills and care for their families. And then, excuse me, one of the asks that we have contemplated in Sarpy County is that we want to know why all new retail can't receive the same tax exemption and not just Gretna. Because new retail, and I'm not talking about business expansion, that would come to Nebraska, that would be kind of a great thing. If we want to grow Nebraska, don't we want to grow all of Nebraska? And Sarpy County, by the way, friends, is your fastest growing county in the state of Nebraska. Now, I like that they set the benchmark for the out-of-state sales at 20%, but how about 30%? So those are kind of the negotiating, the springboard that Sarpy County has. It is my job to speak for the leadership and the citizens of Sarpy County. And I know that we are on a fast-moving train with like 30 railroad cars, I think, now on this bill. I haven't counted yet, but I know there's a lot. It might even be more than Senator Slama's bill from banking and insurance. which I never, ever, ever, ever thought I would see in my 7 years, but this year is unique. But I just want to make sure that
1 minute.
we don't ignore the voices of our fastest growing communities to compensate for one community. I just want to make sure we're being fair and equitable. And I'm hoping that we can have this discussion, and you'll see that we do have an amendment later, and that is so we can have this discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Von Gillern, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to speak on 491, and I might get to that before I wrap up, but I want to address a few things on 692 first. And thank you, Senator Blood, for taking the time to go through and comment on some of the aspects of 692, and some of the things you mentioned I believe, are already covered in the bill, but others certainly could be considered for improvements or changes. My understanding and my reading of the bill is there are performance indicators in the bill, and those performance indicators really is the reporting on the retail sales to the state of Nebraska Department of Revenue. And there's a pretty extensive reporting mechanism that's required in order to ensure that the goal of 692 is met, and that is to primarily to increase sales and increase sales tax revenue for the state of Nebraska, but to really increase the amount of dollars that are coming in from out of state. And that's new income that we wouldn't achieve otherwise. And there's been some argument saying, hey, aren't we robbing from other existing retailers in order to do this? And I don't see that as the case, because first of all, these will be primarily tourism opportunities, and we haven't talked a lot about the tourism, but that is an element of it. Senator Linehan spoke about the sports tourism, but also the economic tourism that will occur. I know that when people come from out of state or from other parts of our own state and they come to town, sometimes the kid will be at the soccer game and mom will be at one venue shopping and dad will be at Cabela's or another venue or Shields. So I know that this is an opportunity that presents itself under 692. In a quick look at the amendment that Senator Blood offered and that she has not mentioned yet, is the biggest change that I see in Senator Blood's amendment is that it would remove the disallowment for racetracks and for gambling. And this bill was never intended to expand gambling. It was never intended to include gaming within the motivation or within the economic incentives of 692. And I know that is a desire of some of the areas that Senator Blood represents, and I certainly respect her for representing her constituency well. But that's not the primary motivation of this bill. It's to bring families in from out of state. It's to bring dollars in from out of state and increase the sales tax revenue. Back to a comment that was made, Senator Erdman and I were having a lively conversation about the best way to tax things in Nebraska and discounts on sales tax. But it occurred to me, and I neglected to point out to him, that this 692, if implemented, costs the state of Nebraska nothing. There is a fiscal note on it, and I believe it said that it would require maybe half of a clerk's time in order to track the dollars and track the sales tax revenue that is submitted, and to ensure that all of the elements of 692 are followed. But it doesn't cost the state anything. And it's estimated that the new development, which again, I want to reiterate, would cost $1 billion to build. So there's an incentive there for the state already through jobs and through materials, through construction and everything that would occur within the state just to get the facility constructed. But it's estimated that the revenue, once up and running, would be around $800 million per year. So I was playing with the numbers. If I just factored that down, let's just say it's $500 million a year. And the state gets 2.25% of the sales tax in that. 1 minute. In that, thank you, Mr. President, of those sales. That total sales tax revenue is $11.25 million. 20% of $500 million at 2.5 or 2.25%. 20% of that coming from out of state, which is $2.25 million. This is new money coming into the state coffers that wouldn't be coming in otherwise if this is not constructed. And then the question becomes, will they build it without the state incentives? And what we're being told is that no, that they won't. This is, again, it's a duplicate, not a duplicate, but it mirrors a site that was constructed in Kansas City that many of us have been to, that's got Great Wolf Lodge and the Nebraska Furniture Mart and IKEA and the racetrack. And that has been so successful in Kansas City that they have now renewed that program for another 30 years. And I assure you that the Department of Revenue, that the legislature down there would not have done that had it not been phenomenally successful. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillern. Senator Dover, you're recognized to speak.
Yeah, I rise in support of LB 727 and oppose the IPP and yield my time to Senator Bostar.
Senator Bostar, you have 4 minutes and 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Dover. Just want to take a moment to talk more about the provisions of the bill that relate to sort of the reform measures that we are putting in place related to tax sales on property. And I thank Senator Kauth for talking about this already. And so for some background, there's a number of reasons that we're pursuing this, one of which is that there's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court that is based on the analysts that follow the court and the docket. The expectation is that the method with which we execute tax sales in the state of Nebraska will become unconstitutional. And it's imperative that we don't put the state in a position where we do not have a mechanism in place, a legal mechanism in place, to handle either the delinquent payment of taxes or the non-payment of taxes. I think for obvious reasons. These funds are essential for sustaining our government and our services that citizens of Nebraska rely on. So the core of the case, my understanding, is it relates to the takings. And the idea being that property cannot be seized without just compensation. And currently, our system falls short of that. In the state of Nebraska, your property can be seized without just compensation. The equity within your property, your home, can be taken from you. In theory, if you were to be short $1 on some property tax payment, given enough time, your home could be taken away from you. And you wouldn't be compensated for its value, minus what you owed. And that's the root of what is being debated in the court. So we are proposing a new system that would not permit a potential windfall where a minor tax delinquency could result in a major financial loss. The reality is, a lot of the times that these cases happen, the individual doesn't know that they missed a tax payment or their payment was insufficient to cover the full tax liability that was outstanding. And perhaps they didn't get the notices informing them that that was the case. This very often impacts the elderly.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Who may not be living in their home. Maybe they're at a care facility, and the notice is being sent to their house telling them that their taxes are delinquent, aren't being received, aren't being handled, aren't being addressed. And so eventually, their home could be seized. And so we're going to try to do everything we can to avoid cases like that from happening. A couple of ways. One is which we will require personal service to be effectuated in all cases that an administrative sale on property such as this would take place, so that individuals would have to be aware of the fact that this is ongoing, that there is outstanding tax liability that is owed. And the other way is any equity that is captured in this process would be
That's your
returned to the
time,
previous
Senator.
homeowner. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Dorn, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone. First off, I would sure like to thank Senator Linehan and her committee and everything for having the meeting we had this morning to go over all the explanations of LB 727 and then that packet, the handout that we had, so it shows a little bit of kind of which ones have amendments and which ones are going here or there and stuff, so you can actually go back and spend a lot less time looking some of this up and looking what's all involved in this. I do stand up very much in favor of LB 727. There are some bills in here that I do have some questions on, but I see some very, very good bills in here. I see some bills that in a normal session we would be having discussion on the floor and given the opportunity to decide how that maybe is a bill that is something we definitely need here in Nebraska and how we can make things better. I do like the one about just what Senator Bostar talked about the buying the tax statements and then ending up with some property that was a windfall gain for them that shouldn't be at all. Not in Nebraska. We've heard stories as I've been in the legislature about how some of those things have come about. I know there's been bills in the past to try and address those. When I look at this one, I think this one here has the possibilities of now doing some things there that, in my mind, make that a very, very good bill. In other words, they aren't going to have a windfall gain on some property just because they bought the tax statements, and that's something that right now is allowed in the state of Nebraska. See a lot of very good bills in here, some that we maybe, as I hear people talk about, we may have to, in future year or years, come back and make some corrections on them. But all in all, I am thankful for this package. It's what has come about this year. Some other senators have mentioned that. And that we have this many bills in one package, I sure don't like, but I do like how we're finally getting to the point of how we are putting the thought process into this and going better about explaining what's all in there, what all the bills are coming from, and how they can be adapted and good for the state of Nebraska. But I also want to thank Senator Hansen. Last summer already, I had, after last fall, the red card meetings, went to a couple of those meetings for I call it the property tax things that they had for the counties and cities. And there were a lot of questions about that. And after some of those meetings, I had people reach out to me, how can we make that better? How can we make improvements? So I definitely thank him for coming back with some, I call it an amendment, and making some things better and that it will flow better. Last year was a very, very much learning experience for that. But I think as we continue on forward with that process of those red cards or pink cards, that we will make that better, and it will be something that will be very useful for the taxpayers of the state of Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, Nebraska. So I would like to thank Senator Linehan and the Revenue Committee for LB 727. One of the many bills contained is our bill, LB 180, which was amended into that. And this would establish a biodiesel tax credit designed to boost value-added agriculture in Nebraska by incenting retail of biodiesel in the state. Biodiesel is a renewable diesel replacement that can be used in existing diesel engines without modification. More importantly, biodiesel is a major value add to Nebraska's soybean and corn production. The biodiesel industry's demand for soybean oil and corn oil is one of the biggest demand side drivers, and we are in a position to fuel that growth with this tax credit. LB 180 provides a tax credit to any retailer who sells and dispenses biodiesel on a retail basis, beginning January 1, 2024, for up to $5 million in tax credits in any calendar year. That's $5 million for the whole state. If the total amount of tax credits requested in any year exceeds such limit, the department shall allocate the tax credits proportionally based upon amounts requested. The bill sunsets after 4 years. Just as ethanol has been a huge economic benefit to our state, adding tremendous value to a homegrown product, the same is true for biodiesel. And just as we designed an incentive to drive demand for that homegrown fuel with Senator Albright's bill last year and Senator Dorn's bill this session, we are doing the same with this legislation. What most people are not aware of is in the state of Nebraska, every other row of soybeans gets exported to China. 50% of our soybean production goes outside of the state of Nebraska. Politically, if something were to happen to that relationship, it could be devastating, the impact that that would have on agriculture in Nebraska. Biodiesel is a way to use the soybeans up that are grown here in the state of Nebraska. It is hoped that this would spur the building of a refinery in the state to take the crushed products, the meal and the oil that we have today, and refine the glycerin out on the soybean side to market those products here in Nebraska. In conclusion, I support LB 727 and yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Linehan, that's 2 minutes, 26 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sitting here listening to everybody, I was just thinking about what we've done this session, or what we're about to do when we get to final reading. We've done a lot. Yes, we cut property taxes. We've got a whole new school funding plan. We have cut income taxes. But we've also, in this bill and other things we have done since the last few years, have been very good for Nebraska. And one of the things that we all know we have a problem with is losing population and losing young people. And I know you've all heard this from Omaha Chamber, State Chamber, Lincoln Chamber. We have got to figure out a way to keep young people in Nebraska. So we've a lot of partners, private partners in Omaha, which since I live close to Omaha, know better. We had people donated a $400 million park in downtown Omaha. In this bill, we are expanding the turnback tax for CHI Convention Center so they can have bigger conventions, which will bring more money and more sales tax to Nebraska. The expansion of the convention center is going to be on the east side, and we'll look at the new Kiewit Luminarium. The amount of personal, private money
1 minute.
that has been generated to help us keep young people here is significant. And these bills are just a way to help a little bit. Another bill, Senator McDonald, I think I've seen him this morning, that's in here is a turnback tax for the Steel House, which sits right next to the brand new park. And then I can start moving west from there. I was at Mahoney Park on Mother's Day. I did not get to the lodge, but I think in the appropriations bill, there is money to update the lodge at Mahoney Park. So what did I drive past to get from downtown Omaha to Mahoney Park? I would drive by the complex that we're talking about, which would be right there. This is huge, huge investment for our future. Increases sales taxes, helps keep young people here, brings tourists. We are real short on tourists.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I rise in support of certain parts of the bill, and I just wanted to thank the Revenue Committee for including the home equity theft bill in the package. I think it's on the amendment that isn't up on the board yet. But I just wanted, appreciate the work the Revenue Committee did to integrate this bill into the bill, and just kind of wanted to recognize the hard work of all the stakeholders on this. So this issue, as Senator Bostar accurately stated, there is a Supreme Court case pending about the takings issue related to the scheme we have in the state of Nebraska that is very problematic. This issue was raised at the Supreme Court by the Pacific Legal Fund, who is litigating that issue on behalf of a citizen in the state of Minnesota. They've also participated in cases here in Nebraska because of our similar scheme. And that issue was brought forward to me in the form of an interim study by the Platt Institute. And we worked over the interim on the issue with the Platt Institute, with Pacific Legal Fund, with the AARP, with the ACLU, with Legal Aid. And then we brought forward the bill this year that was ultimately has been integrated in some form into this bill, which would require that if a tax lien purchaser were to attempt to foreclose on a property, and they'd have to go through a judicial foreclosure, which means they wouldn't be able to capture all of the equity, which would solve this equity theft issue. There's been some changes about only properties over a certain value are going to have to go through that process, but for those lesser properties, there is a return of equity as well. So I appreciate the work that the committee has taken. I appreciate the work of all of the stakeholders on this issue to raise and elevate this issue, to come and testify at the hearing, to sort of parse out exactly what the problem is here. I appreciate the other folks who have elevated this issue. Senator Brandt co-sponsoring the original bill, Senator Wayne co-sponsoring bill, Senator DeBoer, who brought a separate standalone bill on the issue of home equity theft as well, to attempt to address just that issue of notification that Senator Bostar talked about. The reason this is a bipartisan issue is because it is government overreach, taking people's property without just compensation. You see the ACLU, the Americans for Prosperity, Pacific Platt Institute, and Pacific Legal Fund, Legal Aid are very rarely all on the same side of an issue. So I think this is a really important step in the right direction to address home equity theft, and it has been a long time coming that the state of Nebraska would properly address this. We have one of the worst systems in the country, and I know the media has covered this in the last year, and I've talked about it quite a bit on the microphone here, about examples of when individuals' property was stolen, or their value and their equity and their savings was stolen as a result of the system. So the portion of this in this bill that's going to be in the amendment, will come up sometime later, I assume, is a good step in the right direction, and wouldn't be here without all the work of all of those stakeholders to bring it forward and elevate those specific issues around this bill. But I do appreciate the work of the Revenue Committee to integrate it in the package. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Brandt announces some guests in the north balcony, 4th and 5th graders from St. Paul's Lutheran in Plymouth. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Bostelman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand opposed to the IPP motion 806. I want to say a couple things on the mic just for the record. One being LB 384, I think Senator Bostar has. I think that's an important bill in the sense we had another bill, I think maybe Senator Lippincott, maybe Senator Bostar brought it, to move funds to the aeronautics side of the house because DOT didn't give them any money to do the work that they needed to do. So this will go a long ways. Hopefully this will help and go a long ways in actually providing a funding source for our aeronautics side for airports and that they currently do not receive any or very little, if at all. We did, I believe, move that bill out, and it is in on final reading, I think, in our transportation telecommunications bill, if I remember right. The other comment I want to make for the record is on LB 706, the bonding bill. With that, I've talked to Senator Mosier off the mic, and he's answered my questions, but my comments I want to make sure that Department of Transportation understands that there is a plan of building roads in this state, and that plan needs to be followed. And what I don't want to see this bonding effort to jump projects to move projects ahead of another project, to take funding away from areas because they took funding away from County Bridge Match Program. And I can see DOT wanting to do the same thing for other projects across the state. As long as they do the bonding, they do it correctly, and they do it consistently to certain projects and do not interfere with the plan that's been in place to build out roads and highways and bridges across the state, then I'll be in support of it. But if they're going to take bonding, we'll be watching. If they're going to take bonding and start replacing and moving over projects that are out there, then we're going to have a discussion. Because those roads that are out there that have been in the plan, that's out in their plan that we receive every year, what those roads, what those highways are going to be, where they're going to be built and what's going to be done, those need to continue to be done. And the bonding effort needs to be on the expressway, but does not take away from these other projects. I think that's very important for the Department of Transportation to understand. I think it's very important that the Department of Transportation follows that. If things change, I think we will see next year, we'll see some changes in legislation and how they operate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostman. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much. First up, I want to thank Senator Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee for their work on this. There's a lot of different things in here that I support, many of which have already been talked about on the mic, including the redevelopment and the incentives, but the support to CHI and others in Omaha. I also want to thank them for including my LB 756 and Senator Conrad's LB 697, and I'm forgetting Senator Slama's bill number as well, that provide and change provisions for the Nebraska Historic Tax Credit under the Nebraska Job Creation and Main Street Revitalization Act. As many people know, the Nebraska Historic Tax Credit, or NHTC, the program sunset in December of 2022, as no legislation was passed to extend it. The reason why this means a lot to me is this has been something I've been working on for some time. An LB 310 back in 2019 that we passed expedited the receiving of these tax credits, making this program more efficient, and making sure that it is working better and improved. An LB 194 from 2021, I introduced this piece of legislation, which we are now including in this package, which expanded and extended the tax credit to make sure that it continues to exist and it works because of the economic benefit. So I really want to thank the committee again for including this bill I've been working on for the last 5 years to make sure that we're expanding this. The committee and our legislature have plenty of conversations about these programs. It's one of the most successful programs we've actually seen in terms of both mixing the economy and our historic significance with the beauty of our communities. NHTC projects have included low-income housing, courthouses, downtown areas, and areas seeking revitalization have had a tremendous impact on our local workforce. Since the project's inception in 2015, we have experienced a total economic impact of about $207 million, representing more than a 700% return on the state's investment. This direct economic impact of $138 million and an indirect economic impact of $68 million and about $9 million in local and state sales taxes. Now, the NHTC credit also responsible for total workforce impact of nearly 3,000 local jobs and $93 million in new wages. This includes direct employment of 1,700 full-time workers, indirect employment of 1,000 full-time workers. As you can see, this is a critical program. That's why I've been working on it for years. I want to thank the committee members and my colleagues, especially Senator Conrad, that is also working on this to ensure the continuation of and to seek to make improvements to this incredibly successful and impactful program. The major changes that we have in here are making sure the tax credit is expanded. It creates the incentives, increasing the credit to 25% for projects located in Douglas and Lancaster, and 30% projects are located outside in all other counties. It also increases the maximum credit for each project, regardless of the project's location, which will increase them from $1 million to $2 million. And the third requirement is that the Nebraska State Historical Society and the Department of Revenue will issue an annual report to the legislature about the program. The last thing I'll note is the NHCT projects take place in small towns and big cities all across the state. I know that an important priority for our legislature is ensuring that these types of programs are available not just to the big developers in big metropolitan areas like Omaha. Over the past several years, NHCC projects have taken place across the state that are in need of revitalization. This includes neighborhoods in my district, as well as Chadron, Columbus, Fairbury, Friend, Grand Island, Hastings, Lincoln, Pender, Red Cloud, and many others. And I appreciate everybody for their work on this in the Revenue Committee, and Chairwoman Linehan for including LB 756 and LB 697, as well as Senator Slama's bill as these important updates. And thank you to all those that have worked on this for years with me to make sure that projects and programs like this, one are more effective and efficient, which is what we've worked on as a result of work with the Performance Audit Committee in the past and work from this committee in the years improving the efficiency of the program, but two, extending this out to 2030, making sure good programs like this work to maintain economic impact, but also historical significance when we need that across our state. And we're leveraging the federal historic tax credit as well, which is a really important aspect of the combination of this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Been listening to the conversation about these bills that are included in the package. 31 bills is very difficult to understand, get your hands around. Had several conversations with Senator Moser off of the mic on the constitutionality of bonding. Met with the road department. Their lawyers and attorneys have assured me that there is a provision in the Constitution that if we get 3/5 of the body to vote for bonded indebtedness, it is an approval that the road department can use if the funds that are collected to pay the indebtedness come directly related to the project that you're constructing. And we do collect gas tax, and the gas tax will be used to pay the bonded indebtedness up to $35 million annually. So I understand that. One of the issues that we've had with the Department of Transportation is they don't seem to have sufficient funds to do what we've asked them to do. And over time, our road department, the Department of Transportation, hasn't reduced the amount of employees they have back from the 80s when they used to do a lot of work, including dirt work, building roads, and those kind of things. And so they're going to construct, or they want to construct, a 4-lane highway from Minnetonka, Nebraska to north of Bridgeport, 18 miles. And that project's going to cost in upwards of $80 million. And if they did a Super 2 for that stretch, probably save them 90% of that. But that's probably not going to be on the docket for consideration because they had already made their decision years ago. That's what they must do. But when you analyze their project and you see from the city of Alliance north to the state line, 57 miles, it will be a Super 2. So part of the highway, it's okay to be a Super 2, but another part is not. And so when you save $75 or $80 million on one project, it frees up money to do work on another project in another area. So I don't know that the Department of Transportation is that short of funds if they prioritize what they're doing and they become efficient in running their operation. But that's government. That's how government works. That's not very efficient of the taxpayers' dollars. But we will do things here that we've always done, and we never take into consideration how you make it better, how you reduce spending. We just have to ask for more money. So I am not naive enough to believe that any conversation we may have today about this bill or in the future when it's on select will change this bill in any way, shape, or form, or will prevent this bill from passing. My prediction is this bill will probably pass 45-3, and it'll move on to select and get about the same number of votes there. That's what happens when you put 31 bills in one bill. You're generally guaranteed to get 31 votes. So I'm not sure that the people in Nebraska want us to make laws like this in this regard, but it's what we got this year. And so we haven't had the opportunity to individually talk about bills, and it's very difficult to understand 31 bills in one package.
1 minute.
So with that, I will yield my time back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in support of LB 727. And I want to thank, I wanted to mention a piece of the bill, which is LB 706. Thank you, Senator Moser, for bringing this, and Senator Waltz for apparently bringing this last year, the bonding bill. This bill will be very important for District 24 as we have waited for the expansion of Highway 81 to 4-lane going north from York. And of course, will help our other infrastructure projects all across the state. That being said, we need to make sure that the bonding is handled in a very judicious manner so that Nebraska does not get into financial trouble. In addition to that, I wanted to talk just a little bit more about my piece of this package, which is the taxing the vaping liquid. And I was going to read from a couple letters of support from the hearing that we had. And so this one was from Paul Henderson with the Nebraska Medical Association from February 21st. Chair Linehan and members of the committee, the Nebraska Medical Association supports LB 584, which would impose a tax on electric nicotine delivery systems. E-cigarette use, particularly among youth, is a significant public health concern. All of the lasting health consequences of these electronic nicotine products are not known, but there is evolving evidence of substantial health risks, including lung and cardiovascular disease, asthma, and cancer. Unfortunately, e-cigarettes are likely to serve as a gateway to other tobacco products. Our physician members are concerned that the rising use of e-cigarettes and vaping will lead to another generation being dependent on nicotine. LB 584 is a step toward discouraging the use of these products. The NMA appreciates Senator Hughes for her work on this issue and encourages you to support LB 584. And then I was just going to read one paragraph again from the hearing, and this is from the Nebraska chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Kenneth Zoka. Dear Nebraska Senators, my name is Kenneth Zoka. I'm a pediatrician and addiction medicine physician. I have practiced in Nebraska since 1991 and as an addiction medicine physician since 2012, treating adolescents with substance use disorders and psychiatric disorders. I am grateful for the opportunity to comment on LB 584 as a member of the Nebraska chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Adolescents are uniquely prone to nicotine addiction due to neurobiological differences in the developing adolescent and young adult brain. According to the 2022 National Youth Tobacco Survey, 1 in 7 high schoolers reported current use of electronic nicotine delivery systems, we're going to call them ENDS, also known as e-cigarettes. In comparison, around 1 in 40 high school students report current use of other tobacco products. ENDS devices increase the addictive potential of nicotine by making it easier to inhale quantities of nicotine that are difficult for first-time nicotine users to obtain from combustibles tobacco products, meaning you can get more nicotine from a vape device than you can from traditional cigarettes. The large quantities of nicotine being delivered to the developing brain increases the potential for an adolescent to become addicted to nicotine. Evidence shows other harmful effects in adolescents, including risk of transition to cigarettes, lung disease, and increased likelihood of addiction to alcohol and other drugs. My own experience treating youth with substance use disorders shows almost universal use of nicotine prior to the addiction for which they are seeking help, many starting at 12 to 13 years of age. Research studies have shown that an increase on taxation of nicotine products reduces both initiation and current use of tobacco products in adolescents and young adults, specifically as they are particularly price sensitive. Thank you, Mr. President, and I will yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I am currently neutral on this bill, although I have one, a bill in there dealing with turnback tax in Omaha. While I'm a little concerned, which I'm going to work with Senator Luann and those to figure out Senator Linehan, I always call her Senator Luann. This could potentially devastate sports in Omaha, particularly East Omaha. We are seeing, just to give you a little background on sports in East Omaha, there are not a lot of facilities. So they have to use school facilities. And what we learned during COVID is when the schools shut down, it virtually wiped out youth sports in East Omaha, to a point where one high school of Omaha, over 60% of their varsity players transferred to another school district so they can continue to participate. But why it doesn't affect West Omaha is because for basketball, you have UBT Center, which it's a private owned or private court that is utilized by the community. And you have a lot of other, for baseball, volleyball, a lot of facilities that allow sports to happen. The concern and fear that I have around the outlet mall was in the newspaper article that a developer from Kansas City who develops a lot of sports places like Legends and other places down there. If you haven't been to Overland Park, I would tell you to go down there and look at the number of soccer fields and how that looks. And then last year we allowed Ralston to about $12 million to put up some soccer fields. There's just a gaping hole in East Omaha, and the fear that I have and the fear that many of the local sports, youth sports have contacted me over the weekend is that this would pretty much devastate and demolish youth sports in East Omaha. So we're trying to figure out an amendment on select or maybe help balance that and figure out how to make that happen. But I wanted to tell people when I got on the mic is, one, I'm working on it. And two, I'm pretty sure we'll get to a resolution on select to figure this out. But it is a huge concern when you talk about the lack of soccer fields, the lack of outdoor baseball fields, the lack of indoor facilities. And so it is something I'm going to work from general to select. But for those who have been calling and texting my office and calling my office around the youth sport issue that was discussed over the weekend, we are working on it, and we will figure out how to resolve these issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, I still stand opposed to the IPP motion and in support on most of the underlying bill. And I want to say that Senator Von Gillern, I've heard your name mispronounced so many times, I'm not even sure how to say it anymore. Did I say it right? Okay. People keep putting an extra syllable, it's confusing. And you're right, we did include gambling, and that was mostly to get your attention, which it clearly did. So we're not trying to sneak anything through. We're really trying to start a conversation of how we think we can tweak this bill and make it better. But, you know, should we be able to slip it through, we would also be really happy with that. Got to be honest. So. But I do think that there is room for improvement, and I do hope we can have this conversation between general and select. And I hope it's an actual conversation, because it seems like so many of the conversations that I've had on my personal bills that I've had to find rides for have just been conversations to appease us, to get us to back down so we can get all the other bills done. And then basically I'll be screwed at the end of the year when it comes to getting my bills passed. So we'll see what happens, and I still have hope. But I want to bring up a really uncomfortable conversation that I want to have on the mic here. And I talked a little bit about it last week, not because I knew it was going to happen today. And I'm going to take some time to talk about it because I'm on the mic right now. So last year, March of 2022, we also had a delegation, as we just did, come in from Kenya. And of course, we want to bring people in, and we want to make sure that we're stimulating trade, because that helps our farmers, that helps our economy. But when I asked who was in that group, I've asked multiple people, and no one can provide the names of the individuals who we just let into the chambers. Why is that an issue? Because last year, March of 2022, in our governor's office, we had an alleged war criminal in our governor's office. And I don't know if they came on the floor last year or not, I can't remember. But here's the issue that I have with this. If the ICC, if the International Court says that somebody is responsible for crimes against humanity, which resulted in over 1,000 people killed, 900 acts of documented rape and sexual assault, and 350,000 plus displaced because violence was instigated by this individual and a well-known DJ in their country. And then the 4 witnesses that were going to testify against this person when it was going to become public information and the court was going to be held were bribed and threatened by a particular attorney. And then after they withdrew, that particular attorney was found dead in his home, that the court had to go ahead and dismiss it with prejudice because they know that this crime has been committed and they know that there needs to be a court hearing and this person needs to be held accountable. Why are we letting these people into the Capitol? And I want to be really careful because I'm not saying that this person is again in this delegation as he was last year. I'm saying, why aren't we being more careful with who these people are in these delegations? Trade is most definitely important. But we just had a big brouhaha with the Chinese scare on this floor, which is why I talked about this, by the way, last week, where we're creating boogeymen, but when the real boogeymen come into our Capitol, we're oblivious. The media did not cover it.
1 minute.
They were oblivious. No senator talked to me about it. You all seemed oblivious. I'm just a grandma from Sarpy County and I knew. If you read the news, you knew who that person is and what their issue is and why we should be concerned when they're in our Capitol. I think if people come onto the floor, we should have a list accessible to us. We don't know who's coming onto this floor half the time. They might be a cousin, a friend, a neighbor, but that neighbor maybe is going through a legal issue right now because they murdered another neighbor. We don't know. And I think the lack of us not caring or knowing is really telling when it comes to our security. I asked State Patrol, they didn't know, and I'm not blaming State Patrol, by the way. I'm blaming our process.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Conrad, you are recognized to close on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really appreciated the thoughtful and interesting debate on all of the different component parts presented in the committee amendment. I think just to reiterate, I filed the motion in the wake of the unprecedented rules change that was adopted by the body to oppress and suppress minority rights without being afforded an opportunity for a public hearing. The motions were filed to structure debate for the remaining part of the session, so I would urge your red vote in regards to the motion, and I'll ask for a call of the House and a roll call vote in regular order. Thank you, Mr. President.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
20 yeas, 5 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators McKinney and Brewer, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Members, the question is the motion to indefinitely postpone. There's been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting no. Senator Albright. Senator Arch. Voting no. Senator Armendariz. Voting no. Senator Ballard. Voting no. Senator Blood. Voting no. Senator Boston. Voting no. Senator Bostar. Voting no. Senator Bostelman. Voting no. Senator Brandt. Voting no. Senator Brewer. Voting no. Senator Breezy. Voting no. Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting Senator Clements. Voting no. Senator Conrad. Voting no. Senator Day. Not voting Senator DeBoer. Not voting Senator DeKay. Voting no. Senator Dorn. Voting no. Senator Dover. Voting no. Senator Dungan. Voting no. Senator Erdman. Voting no. Senator Frederickson. Voting no. Senator Holleran. Voting no. Senator Hansen. Voting no. Senator Hardin. Voting no. Senator Holcroft. Voting no. Senator Hughes. Voting no. Senator Hunt. Not voting Senator Ibaugh. Voting no. Senator Jacobson. Voting no. Senator Kauth. Voting no. Senator Linehan. Voting no. Senator Lippincott. Voting no. Senator Lowe. Voting no. Senator McDonald. Senator McKinney. Voting no. Senator Mosier. Voting no. Senator Merman. Voting no. Senator Raybold. Voting no. Senator Reapy. Voting no. Senator Sanders. Voting no. Senator Slama. Voting no. Senator Vargas. Voting no. Senator Von Gillern. Voting no. Senator Walls. Voting no. Senator Wayne. Senator Wishart. Vote is 0 ayes, 40 nays, Mr. President, on the motion to indefinitely postpone.
The motion fails. Mr. Clerk, for items. I raise the call.
Mr. President, your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 814 as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Additionally, your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 818 as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Notice committee hearing from the Health and Human Services Committee. New LR from Senator Kauth, LR 165. That will be laid over. LR 166 from Senator Walls. That will be referred to the Executive Board. LR 167, 168, and 169, all from Senator Conrad. Those will all be referred to the Executive Board. LR 170 from Senator Dungan. That will be referred to the Executive Board. And LR 171 from Senator Jacobson. That will be referred to the Executive Board. Senator LR 172 from Senator Vargas, referred to the Executive Board. LR 173 from Senator Breezy. That'll be laid over. LR 174 from Senator Reapy. That will be referred to the Executive Board. Mr. President, concerning LB 727, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh would move to reconsider the vote taken with MO 1058.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open on your motion to reconsider.
Thank you, Mr. President. Morning, colleagues. My staff made a binder for this bill for me, which, as you've heard me talk before, I love a good binder. This one is enormous. I think it has something like 36 bills in the amendment. I recall Senator Clements saying that he didn't vote for a bill last week because it had 21 bills amended into it, and that was too many. Well, this one is a real doozy. So let's see here. Just getting to the committee statement. Explanation of amendments. LB 1152 incorporates the provisions of 20 other tax-related bills into LB 727. The bills and amendments included are LB 74, LB 96 as amended by AM 64, LB 100, LB 118, LB 165, LB 180 as amended by AM 142, LB 300, LB 344, LB 384, LB 407, LB 447, LB 491, LB 495, LB 580 as amended by AM 634, LB 584 as amended by AM 509, LB 692 as amended by AM 1012, LB 978 as amended by committee. Make it so. LB 704, LB 706 as amended by 692, LB 732 as amended by committee. Make it so. AM 169, AM 867, and committee. Make it so. Amendments. The committee voted to adopt AM 1152 on an 800 vote. Whew, that's a lot. Yeah, so I, was intrigued this morning by the fact that we took almost 3 hours on the IPP motion. And I commented on it to several people that the queue was filled with multiple hours of people talking on the IPP motion, which I found fascinating because it seemed that everybody was loving on the bill, but nobody wanted to get to the underlying amendment of whatever all of this is. So I just am curious why everyone is helping block the committee amendment. I mean, thanks, I guess. Makes it easier for me with just around 5 hours left, several motions ready to go, that we now might not get to the committee amendment because of the work of so many people in the body. I think it was, and I apologize if I'm getting it wrong, I think it was Senator Erdman who said, you'll get 31 votes if you have 31 people's bills in the package. I'm like, well, that's true, but how many votes do you get if 31 people worked to block the amendment from getting attached? Because that's kind of the path we got on this morning. I didn't even talk on the underlying IPP. I could have added another 15 minutes. We could have taken the IPP itself almost to lunch. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious what the plan was. Why filibuster this tax package with 30 some bills in it? Why don't we want to get to the amendment? Makes me suspicious of the amendment, to be honest. Are you all not in agreement on the amendment? Are you still negotiating something on the amendment? Are we hoping to get some changes in the next 5 or so hours? I don't know. But it certainly, I thought so my undergraduate degree is in sociology. And I have a minor in political science, and this will shock everyone, justice and peace studies. And the sociology part of it is I am fascinated by people, by norms, by mores. And so when I see something happening, now some might look at the psychology of it, I look at the sociology of it. What is collectively happening in the group? What are the driving factors? How are people organizing? Why are they organizing? So this morning when I saw the queue in 3 columns, which is a very, very long queue. Right now the queue is nothing, but I saw the queue in 3 columns, which is several hours of speakers. I thought something's up here. Something is up. And I think I should be concerned about what is in this bill. So thank you for telepathing that to me, that I should be concerned about what is in this bill. And now I am concerned about what is in this bill. And everyone here just made it that much easier for me to block the committee amendment. So thank you for that as well. And I'm just thinking, well, over lunch, I just might have to dig in a little bit more into what is happening with this bill, because there's certainly a significant amount. Build Nebraska Act is on page 20 to 33. That's 20 to 33. I don't even know what the Build Nebraska Act is. Legislature finds that safe and modern highway infrastructure is of great importance to Nebraska's residents, agricultural economy, business economy, and the future growth. Furthermore, the legislature finds that it is in the interest of Nebraska taxpayers to leverage historically low interest rates to offset the challenges that construction, inflation, and uncertain federal highway funding pose to adequately finance the state's infrastructure needs. It is the intent of the legislature to conservatively utilize bond financing by issuing bonds not to exceed $450 million in principal and $35 million in annual debt service for a period of not more than 19 years in order to accelerate completion of the highway construction projects identified and to be identified for funding under the Build Nebraska Act. Okay. Upon the written recommendation of the Department of Transportation, the Commission, acting for and on behalf of the state, may issue from time to time bonds under the Nebraska Highway Bond Act by resolution as described in Section 39-2209 in such principal amounts as determined by the Commission for the purpose of accelerating completion of the highway construction projects identified and to be identified for funding under the Build Nebraska Act. The principal amounts, interest rates, maturities, redemption provisions, sale prices, and other terms of the bond so authorized to be issued shall be in accordance with terms or conditions established by the Commission. No bonds shall be issued after June 30, 2029, except for refunding bonds.
1 minute.
Thank you. Except for refunding bonds issued in accordance with the Nebraska Highway Bond Act. The proceeds from the sale of any bonds issued, net of costs of issuance, capitalized interest, and necessary or appropriate reserve funds shall be deposited in the State Highway Capital Improvement Fund for use pursuant to the Build Nebraska Act. The Commission is hereby granted all powers necessary or convenient to carry out the purpose and execute the powers granted by the Nebraska Highway Bond Act. Bonds shall be paid off by June 30, 2042. Okay. There's more, but I think I'm about out of time on my opening. But never fear, I am in the queue, and I will speak on this further on my next time. I'm also interested in the committee Make It So.
That's your time.
Thank you.
Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Linehan announces some guests in the North Balcony, fourth graders from Skyline Elementary in Elkhorn. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm interested in this Make It So. I know I talked to Senator Breezy last week about Make It So language, and so I'm, pretty fascinated by it. But I see on the committee statement on page 10, LB 697, Senator Conrad's bill, as amended by committee, Make It So, seeks to amend provisions of the Nebraska Job Creation and Main Street Revitalization Act. And that's on pages 85 to 94. So Okay. Let's see here. The department, line 3 on page 85 is where I'm starting. Historically significant real property means a building or an at-grade or above-ground structure used for any purpose except for a single-family detached residence, which, at the time of the final approval of the work by the officer pursuant to section 77-2906. So it is inserting the language of building or structure, and it's inserting building or an at-grade or above-ground structure. Then if you skip down on page 86, it strikes some language. So it strikes through lines 24 through 30 for historically significant real property that is not located in a city of the metropolitan or primary class $25,000, or for historically significant real property that is located in the city of a metropolitan or primary class, the greater of $25,000 or 25% of the historically significant real property's assessed value. Okay, striking that. And heading into the amount of the credit shall be equal to 25% of the eligible expenditures up to a maximum credit of $1 million. We're striking that language. And inserting for this on page 88 for historically significant real property located in a county that includes a city of a metropolitan class or a city of the primary class, the credit shall be equal to 25% of eligible expenditures. For historically significant real property located in any other county, the credit shall be equal to 30% of eligible expenditures. In all cases, the maximum credit allocated to any one project shall be $2 million. Interesting. Well, we're about to go to lunch, and let's see here. We've got the Biodiesel Tax Credit Act. It's on page 72. I think we can dig into that after lunch. On page 79, we've got the credit to the Department of Transportation Aeronautics Capital Improvement Fund, all the proceeds of the sales and use taxes imposed pursuant to this section of sale or lease of aircraft. It's defined in section 3-101 of statute. How many pages is this? You know, this isn't actually that long considering how many bills are in it. It's only 138 pages.
1 minute.
I mean, the mainline budget is 181 pages. So I think did that have more than 36 bills in it? I honestly don't know. I don't know if it did or not. So, all right, well, I guess we will continue this conversation after the vote. I suppose we'll vote on this, vote on the next, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think I'm probably, I don't know, maybe we're adjourning for lunch. Maybe I'm closing on my motion. I guess we'll see. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, items quickly. 2 amendments to be printed from Senator Hunt to LB 810. New LRs, LR 175 and 176 from Senator Ballard. Those will both be referred to the Executive Board. And LR 177 from Senator Merman. That'll be laid over. Priority motion, Mr. President. Senator Decay would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Senators, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. We are in recess.